Hi, Steve. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you, Cindy.
It's good to be here. So, we're going to have a conversation today and do our session for HECA to talk about surveys and how we can use them in our business. So, we're really glad to have everybody join us today, and we hope that this conversation is enlightening and informative for them. And you are the pioneer in all of this. And in many ways, you started the whole movement toward using surveys and assessments for students. So, my first question for you, what is the difference? What is the difference between an assessment and a survey?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's great to be with you, and it's great to have a chance to be a part of this HECA conference. So it's an exciting time. Um, I feel like if you look at surveys in the traditional way, it's a way to collect data, and it allows us to have information about a student that we may not have in other ways. The difference between a survey and an assessment is that typically assessments allow measurements. So some of the surveys that we have that we're going to be talking about today are in fact measurements. They allow for a score or a ranking or something of that sort, an appraisal. And some of the surveys are not oriented toward measurements.
Right. And I think that's important for people to understand too, is that you can get value from an instrument, whether it's a survey or assessment, a questionnaire or worksheet, whatever, without having a predicted or a quantified outcome. But getting that information is so key. So that leads us to
Yeah.
the next question is, why does it benefit us? Why are surveys important in the work that we do?
Um, as far as I can analyze this, we are dealing with students, and they are complex beings. And what you see is not always what you get. So I feel like given that matching students with colleges requires the knowledge of a student, that using surveys can really help us as we are trying to make the best match we can. It seems to me that um, we often think of college matching as three parts. One part is sort of the student's background, rigor of classes and scores and so forth. The next part is an identification of what the student is looking for, and then the third part is our knowledge of schools to be able to connect. But that all misses the fourth part, and that's a thorough analysis of the student herself, and that's where surveys come in. How do you find it to be important in your practice?
Oh, I totally agree, because I remember when I first started as an IEC, and so many of the sessions, like at this conference too, and in our classes, everybody talks about finding the right fit college, right? But how do you find the right fit college if you don't know anything about the student? Then I agree with you, that fourth piece, and that's where you need to start, because I know everything about all the colleges in the world, but that's not going to be any good if I don't know the student. And so I found, and I started looking around, and your survey was one of the very first ones that I found, which was the college match. There was just none other ones available. I'm like, well, what is going to be important? Because you can't get everything. And, find all the things that a student needs at a college. So what's going to be more important to them, and where are they going to need support? And I think it goes back to what you said too, is what you see on the surface is not necessarily where the student is. You've got to help them do some self-reflection and help them dig a little deeper, because it's like many other things. The first thing that comes out of their mouth is not necessarily, what the real issues or what their real concerns are. So we need to give them ways that they can feel comfortable and that they can feel empowered and that they can feel, that connection by doing these and learning more about themselves. And the other thing I've found too, Steve, is that it really helps to build that family um, approach to it. It really benefits students to hear their parents say positive things or share things about them that come out of a survey. And then wouldn't necessarily, if I just asked them straight out, they might not talk about that in the same way. But if I have them do a card sort, or we do a priority, or we talk about their strengths for careers, all these different things, then that generates conversation that not only stays in my office, but it goes beyond my office. And the same thing, it's helpful for the parents to hear the students. So I use surveys a lot in my practice, especially early on. And one of the other benefits is that it gives you an opportunity to start working with students earlier. And some practices, you don't want to work with students until maybe the junior year. As many people know, I'm in Central California. Probably 80-90% of my students are first generation students. So we need to start those conversations early. And I find surveys is a real good way to do that. So,
You said something that's really important, and that is that surveys help students learn about themselves. So it's not just us as IECs learning about the student, it's also providing ways for self-analysis, and sort of um, uh, that sort of self awareness is really an important feature in doing surveys.
it is. And that growth, it helps foster growth for the students, whether it's for, a year or 4 years. It really helps them to be able to look at where I was at this point and where I am now, and have that conversation. So um,
Yeah.
I really, really see that. And it benefits our practices too. So if you can bring on students earlier, then that helps you build your practice faster, helps you have students that you can sign on sooner. And it gives you data. You talked about data before, and that's an important aspect to have as well. And so I love having that interaction. And that's one of the challenges that we've had with COVID, right? Is how do you translate any in-person survey activity interaction to online? And that has been challenging. It's been challenging for me. I miss the one-on-one, the physical aspects of certain things you just can't replicate on a Zoom. But
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, and another thing that is a benefit for us in our practices is that using surveys improves the quality of the time we spend with students.
mhm.
The time that we have with students is precious. And while it's sometimes good to be shooting the breeze about chemistry test, excuse me, um, surveys allow for a discussion of important qualities and interesting qualities, and so it raises the level of discourse, which I
Mhm.
think is really important for practitioners.
Oh, I agree. I totally agree. And it also provides you, it should be part of your curriculum, right? So that at this level, we're going to offer this. And then, I'll have students take this survey either on their own or at the end of a session. And then we know we're going to talk about it at the next session. And parents look forward to that, and they know, and then they refer their friends. And so knowing it's a part of your curriculum and what order you're going to give certain surveys to, this is why, this list that we put together, there's how many, over 60 surveys that we've got.
Yep.
You can offer different surveys at different times and make it part of your curriculum. And parents and families will look forward to being able to come and have those conversations with you, because they'll be know from friends, colleagues, siblings, that, oh, I got to do this, so now when I come see you, I'll get to do this too. So it really does help us to organize our practice too.
And I think it also helps us learn about how students have changed.
Hmm.
If we use a survey in the ninth grade and perhaps repeat it with the same student in the 11th grade, um, it also allows us to develop information about trends with our students. We can each,
Hmm.
because of all the students that we see, we can see if certain elements of surveys are more important or less important than they were the year before. That raises the bar and gives us more good information about our students.
Yeah. And I think that you bring up a really good point, is that we need to keep it relevant, right? As things happen and change. And you and I have been talking about social emotional wellness, emotional resiliency, and those kinds of things. Those are things we might be putting into our practices with this last year with COVID, because it has such a toll, an emotional toll on our students. If we're not incorporating that into what we're doing, what is their level of anxiety today? What is your mood? And if they're worried about their parents or siblings or something else, talking about college is not going to be as productive as maybe talking about that anxiety that they have for, school, or, social anxieties or things like that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we need to be really in tune with that. And that's why assessing and reviewing what's surveys or assessments or tools we use. I mean, they can include worksheets, it can include activities, it can include any number of things. So what are some that you use in your practice? And tell us a little bit more about the ones that you developed too, Steve.
Sure. Well, the self-survey for the College Bound is in College Match, and it is also on my website. It's available. Anybody can use it for free. Um, and that was developed just because I felt a need to learn more about the kids that I was seeing 30 years ago. And that survey has changed a great deal. In fact, the new edition of College Match, which will be out probably at the end of 21, has some new categories, has an emotional intelligence and a growth mindset. So I have used the self-survey a lot in providing a conversation starter about issues like participant learner and social consciousness and school enthusiasm. So I give all of my students that. I also use the qualities worksheet, again from College Match, and again on my website. Um, the qualities worksheet is a way to encourage students. I find it to be probably best used in the junior year. I have everyone complete that, and that's very helpful. Um, I also I like the values surveys, and several of them are on our handout. One of them, which is number 30 on the list, is the 10 most important values. I find that that's really helpful. I also find that looking at the lists of transferable skills can be really helpful, and I do that often with my students, particularly a student who may think that their scores aren't what they should be, or something like that. Once you can present um, transferable skills, and they see that, oh my gosh, I have, my listening is really good. I work as a team, I work well as a teammate. I have good creativity. Those kinds of things are what I use. Tell us what you use, Cyndy.
So I actually use quite a few. And this goes into like different grade levels, as we were talking about having different ages. So one of the first things I'll use with younger students is a learning styles survey. It's one that I've developed based on years of work and involvement with students when I worked with Avid. But having students understand their learning styles, and am I a kinesthetic learner, am I an auditory learner, and what my learning approach is. Do I like to work in groups? Do I like to work as an individual, and things like that? And so helping them, that helps give them some good foundations, so that as they go through school, that they're learning how to work smarter and not harder, and find the ways to help them be able to study more effectively. And it's another area that parents really can benefit from. I remember one of my students that I did this with, and her parents always set her in the back room, had her sit by herself in a quiet environment. When we did the learning study, she was totally opposite. She liked being in a room where there was lots of music and stuff going on. It helped her to focus. She wanted to study with the groups, and she was much more a verbal, like she'd rather do a presentation or something than a written assignment. And her parents, she's just like, gee, see, I told you. And her parents could see, based on the survey results, that everything they've been doing and trying to help her with had been totally opposite of what she needed. And so she felt very good, and the parents were a little bit sheepish about it, because they thought they were doing all these right things. So that's having the learning styles and just helping students to identify, and it gives them something objective. I mean, she's been telling her parents all along, I don't do this so well, but they didn't believe her, and now they actually believed her. So I really have had great experience with the learning styles. And then I also do Myers-Briggs. It's through Guided Path. It's one we developed, and Claire Law, who's another IC, helped write this for us. And looking at your personality and how that connects to potential majors and careers can be so valuable, because now, and this is another area that I think we're going in as IECs, is if we're not connecting college to careers and majors, we're doing a disservice to the families, because it's gotten so expensive to go to college. The more work we can do in high school to explore that, the better off we're going to be. So helping, and it doesn't mean they're a finite. It doesn't mean they're set, but helping them identify what their strengths are, what their preferences, what their personality, what are other people doing who have a similar personality. And it generates another opportunity for discussion. I love the things, like one of the things about the Myers-Briggs, and you talked about a participant learner. Well, the opposite is an observant learner. Well, you have a continuum, right? Well, where are you on that continuum? And that's what I love about Myers-Briggs, is where are you on that continuum? And before I go through the results with a student, a family, I have a little worksheet, and I'll put it in our folder. But I go through it with them first. And it's like, well, how does this describe you? Where do you put yourself on the continuum? And then I have the parent or two parents put them on the continuum. And then that way they can talk about it. And then when we reveal the results, if there's something different, I'm not surprised. I'm not looking at it and going, oh, I didn't know you felt this way, but this says you're here. we have a basis for a discussion. And then again, the parent and the student have had a conversation, and I've been a part of that, and that makes the survey, I mean, that's the most valuable part of it. It's not necessarily taking the survey, it's not the beginning and the end, it's the middle, right? In terms of having that conversation, and what does this mean to you, and how do you relate it to who you are, what you want to do, where is that going to take you? So those are a couple of ones that I do. I also do one that's based on the Holland model. The self-directed search, or it's called personality mosaic. Um, and it creates a map, and the students and the parents can see, yeah, I'm artistic, and the parents may be worried because they want them to be in another field, but they can see how things connect and where they relationship to each other. And that also generates a lot of opportunities for conversation and making choices, and setting priorities and things. So
Very, very interesting. There's been a lot of discussion, some on the talk lists and so on, about the Myers-Briggs and whether it's valid and so forth. But the point is that it has been a standard, a classic in personality assessment over many decades. And say what you will, it's interesting, it seems valid. Um, it provides a good way. You talked about parents. I frequently will give the Myers-Briggs to a student, then to a parent.
yep.
There's really good evidence if you are a INTJ, that you would work better with X and Y and Z. So if a parent is in conflict with that, you can adjust a little bit to really be an effective consultant. And on our list, there are many Myers-Briggs inventories. The 16 personalities is probably the most popular one, but you will see, and that's number 38 on our list, but other Myers-Briggs are number 19, 24, and 28. Try some of them out, see which one works best. Most of them offer a great amount of information about each of the 16 categories. So a really good way to work with parents. One other thing that actually I discovered just in the last few months, there's a website that has a teen parenting inventory. It's number 12 on the list. It's a little more it's a little more obvious. It can sometimes be a little critical, so I've been using it cautiously, but there's some interesting aspects of it, and it's worth checking out
So is this for parents to
for
take?
parents. Yeah,
I
for
think that's
parents.
I
Yeah,
think that's great, because the more we can involve parents, this, I don't care. Again, this is coming from my perspective, but going to college is a family event, right? This child is going to college, but the parents are sending them. So the more you can get everybody on the same page and understanding, and have those conversations, the better outcomes you're going to have. So I think that's great that you have, that there are parent surveys. And yeah, I have parents who love to take these surveys. A lot of, they want to do the personality mosaic or the Find My Spark right along with their students. So
yeah.
they really like to engage in that way. And one things too I wanted to mention is that students like to answering questions about themselves, right?
Yeah,
They have all these
exactly.
Facebook surveys, and
Yeah,
what kind of chair are you or whatever. And so
yeah.
let's just tap into that natural curiosity and tendency, and utilize it in.
Well, and to go along with that, Cindy, is it seems like every time we do a survey of things that consultants like to do and don't like to do, we always hear, parents are a problem, and they some consultants are saying, they wish they could spend all their time with students and so forth. Um, Doing some surveys with parents allows some discussion that doesn't involve, brand name colleges and all of these things that can cause some conflict with parents and IECs. So doing some of these inventories with parents can really take the focus off of some of the hot button issues that can be problematic in our practices.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because it helps the parents to articulate and share, and then they can, you can walk them through, what's important, and validate their feelings, but help them understand, other aspects of it. So I definitely. So what are some other, you've shared some fun surveys or things that you found interesting. What are some other surveys? Are there any other specific surveys that you want to share off of the list, Steve? And I'll just
Um,
mention to everybody, this list is going to be in a public a Google folder that we're going to make. It's through our publicly shared folder. So we'll have a link in the question and answer section. So you have to come to the question and answer section if you want to get the link. And we'll have both Steve and my contact information in there as well.
Good.
So what are some other surveys that you've found?
Well, there's just so many interesting ones, and I encourage our participants at the meeting this week to take some time and look over our list, because there really are some interesting ones. Let me point out a few. There are curiosity profiles, number 10 and number 11 on the list, that assess unconventional thinking, and there's one from the Harvard Business Review. I think they're fascinating and interesting. Um, the open source project number 27 has a character personality test, and they ask a series of questions, and then they compare your answers to fictitious characters. So, like Harry Potter characters, or Hannibal Lecter, or Amy Farrah Fowler, or something. Those are that one is a particularly interesting one. Um, the grit scales.
Mhm.
We have several grit scales on our list. This is based on Angela Duckworth's
Mhm.
work. Number 17, number 3 have grit scales where you really are measuring resilience and stick to itness. So those are ones that I think are really fun to use, and finally, number 25 on the list are some moral foundations of life. It's closely related to some of the other ones about values, but very interesting and fun to give, and fun to go over the responses. So
Well, the grit, isn't that connected to mindset as well? Growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. Is that a connection as well?
yes, indeed. Although that's another, that growth mindset is another construct
Mhm.
that is assessed by some of these surveys. Which ones do you like for fun?
Um, I have, in terms of just fun and exciting, I have a little survey that I start off again with my students early on, and it's called Getting to Know You. And again, it's in the document. My issue was, as I started doing all these so many years ago, there was nothing available. So I couldn't, I had to create some of these because there was just, besides yours, I couldn't find any others. So, but this getting to know you was an idea that I had seen done. And so I adapted it and implemented. And it's just two things. The students talk about things in pairs, two things in my room that are important to me, two people that I know who love me, two words that I can use to describe myself. And so we list about music and all those things. And so there's no pressure. It's a great icebreaker. Again, it gives you a lot of opportunities for discussion. And the parents, I often have the parents write them down and the students, and then we all compare, and they love hearing what each other says. They like hearing how close or far away they were. And the other benefit for this, Steve, is that then when we're 2 years, 3 years down the road, when we're sitting down and they're writing those essays and those quick responses that they might have to do, when you're sitting and faced with an application, all of a sudden you have that blank page, block. I just pulled this out and said, well, you said this is what you liked, and these are words to describe you. And it just helps break that ice. So we get to use it. And that's the other thing about having these instruments and tools and using as you work with students is you can use them for multiple purposes. So my students are so relieved when I come out and we can do the values exercise and, all the different things you can do with essays, but I can pull something out that they did at a totally different time. And you can just see the tension just kind of leave their bodies because, oh, I've got this, So that's one of the fun ones.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. And I think some of the surveys, as you've mentioned, some of the surveys that deal with values are particularly helpful as you start working on essays and personal statements.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And the other thing I find really helpful is doing a priority. I know one of the ones is that is available. That another IC has developed is the Corsava cards by Anne Wagner, and those I know several people who use those, and those are really valuable. And there's a whole online version versus the paper, like printed cards. And again, I have some cards that I set up before she made those available. But knowing what a family's priorities are is really key, because you don't want to find out in May that parents don't want to send their children outside of 100-mile radius, or only have so much to spend, or different things. So identifying those priorities early on in a fun, active, interactive, less threatening way is really key. So that's another thing my families really enjoy, and I benefit. I can't do my practice without it, because then you're shooting in the dark. It's like hitting a target, a dart target, and just trying to find the bullseye without knowing where it is. So
yeah, well, and the Corsava cards are helpful. Again, I use the qualities worksheet to help determine the qualities that someone is looking for. But I love the notion of cards. And on our list, number 20 is the Nodell card sorts. And there are motivated skills and career values, and it works the same as Corsava, where people are separating into the skills that they do really well, careers that they're interested in. Very easy to, well, was easier to use when we were seeing students face to face, but still possible to use.
Yeah, I've actually interviewed one of the developers of that. He's a professor at Colorado State University. And so yeah, those are very valuable.
Is that Rich? Is that Rich Feller?
Feller,
Yeah.
Yeah, and he talks about how important it is to have those values and connect them to careers and connect them to aptitudes. And he also talks about how it's an equity issue as well. And that's a whole nother topic, but I found it very interesting to learn that from him.
Well,
So,
that is interesting, and as we're getting close to the to the end, I did want to mention a couple of things just generally about these, and that is that we haven't mentioned a lot of the skills
Right.
surveys. We've talked a lot about the character and personality and motivations and values, but skills, particularly for younger students, you mentioned earlier how important that is in your area of the world and with your practice of first generation students. So learning skills, listening, mental rigidity, perfectionism, um, and particularly study habits. I
Mhm.
find that doing a study habits survey with students in the 8th or 9th grade is a great way to develop a checklist for things that can be improved upon as one moves their way through high school.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. And going back to what you were just saying too about skills and things, and identifying those aptitudes and what you're good at and what your strengths are and capitalizing on that. And there are several surveys. The youth science one is one that I've used, to help with that. And that helps us to make those connections as well.
yes.
So um, in closing, is there anything you mentioned you already that you have a survey that you've added this year because did you add it because of COVID, or are there any others that you added because of COVID, Steve?
I I did not add these things because of COVID. I added them because of the analysis of what scales on the self survey were working best and what were not working as well. Um, that will be out in the new edition of College Match, which is at the end of the year. Um, um, but in terms of COVID, um, persistence is important. Effective time management. So I have added more on motivation, independence. Um, uh, COVID has obviously students with more time to learn on their own, and so some of those skills like time management are particularly important. So I have found giving some of those, and there are so many resources online that if someone is not the best time manager, there are courses, there are resources that are available for that student.
Yeah.
Have you added or changed anything in regard to or in as a result of COVID?
I am going to add for my upcoming class. I haven't added it yet, but I'm going to add some social emotional, check-ins with my students. So the research that Mark Burnett did on, the permission to feel, and because of COVID, so many students, the anxiety and depression and just their social emotional well-being has just taken such a hit. I'm going to incorporate in that's a little app that they can download. It's called the feeling meter or the mood meter is what it's called. And it's on I'll have a link to that too. But it costs like $5, but just to have my students check in and say, okay, how are you feeling today? What's your mood? And then it'll build emotional resilience, and they can track their moods over time so they can see, and then that'll help them. Again, that's going to help with transition. I mean, there are surveys you can do for transition from high school to college and things like that. So that's one that I'm planning on implementing with my rising juniors. So
That is excellent, and I'll be interested to see how it turns out. And the mood meter is a really good resource. As we end, any tips for IECs in terms of using surveys?
I personally, if you're not using surveys, I don't know how you do a practice, frankly. So there's no right way or wrong way to do it. Just find things that work for you and that you can use in your own way, you know, that you can relate to. And if you can relate to them, then you're going to be able to help your students and families relate to them. I also wanted to mention that, you know, some of these surveys are free and some are paid. There's nothing wrong with paying for surveys for your students. It adds to the professional level of what you offer. I do not think you always have to have free surveys. It's nice to have them, but sometimes it's even better to have a paid one, you know, have a paid report, or, you know, your own branded approach where you can put in your logo and things like that. So
Yes.
you don't have to do everything, but go through the list and explore things and find some new things. You know, as you said, Steve, you found even more. So it's exciting. I think it's an important part of what we do.
Yes. And just to add to those good comments, you have to take some time as an IEC to check some of these out.
Yep.
As you say, many are free. Some of them are you have to pay for, but see what works for you. See what works for your students in your practice. You mentioned U Science. I love Clifton Strengths.
Mhm.
I use that's also a paid, but I find that to be an excellent career inventory and worth paying for. I would also add that many of these paid surveys, if you contact the publisher and tell them what you do, oftentimes if they don't advertise a special rate, they will tell you about a special rate. If you get 10, they'll give you a special discount. So check that out as well.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you, Steve, very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We hope to see you on our question and answer, which will be following.
Thank you so much, Cindy.